Hello everybody, and welcome back to another spooktacular Preptober video. I had so many people say that yes, you wanted to hear all about the index card method, that I am making this video for you today, and I am super hopeful that this is going to really spark some ideas for you for your own process. Now, I am going to show you all the things, and just know that I don't even follow every single one of these steps for each book. It really comes down to trusting yourself and your own intuition. How much plotting do you personally really need to do? How much planning do you need to do? As I said in last week's video, there is no right or wrong. There are no rules. There's just, does it work for you or does it not? And every writer is going to have their own individual process. But one of the best ways to figure out your process is to get ideas from other writers and see how they do it. Try it on like you're trying on some pants and go for it. See if it works, and if it does, take what you can. If it doesn't, then move on and try something new. My index card method is something that I learned from an author named Alexandra Sokoloff. She has a background in screenwriting, and about 8 years ago I went to one of her presentations, and she really blew my mind with taking this idea of plotting that she learned from screenwriting and applying it to novels. She actually has an incredible book called Screenwriting Tricks for Authors that I will have linked in the description for you below, because it is really, really good if you're trying to figure out what happens at each of these points in your story. But in the end, almost no writer just completely takes someone else's process. You have to take what you learn and make it your own. So I'm gonna show you mine and my way of doing things. If you're interested in seeing this index card process, just keep watching. So if you are new to me and to this channel, my name is Sarra Cannon. I am the author of more than 25 novels, mostly young adult and new adult contemporary fantasy style novels, including the Shadow Demon Saga. And I am actually about to celebrate next week my 10-year anniversary from starting my own publishing company and self-publishing my books. The first one is called Beautiful Demons, and if you would like to grab the Beautiful Demons box set, it is currently free at all major retailers. So if you would like to support me, you can grab that Beautiful Demons box set, which has the first 3 books in my series, for free, and I will have that linked for you down below. Now, those 3 books that you'll pick up, I wrote before I had a method like this to rely on, and my writing has gotten better and better over the years as I continue to work on my process. So hopefully this will help to spark some ideas for you as you develop your own process. So first things first, I use the basic 3-act structure, but when you are plotting in 3 acts, it really comes out to be more like 4 sections of your story. You have that first act, then you have the second act is split really into 2 parts, the first half of the second act and the second half of the second act. Then you have the third act. So it turns out to be 4 somewhat equal parts of the story. So even though it's 3 acts, it's really 4 segments. So when we get to the story grid section of this video, you will see me using 4 sections rather than 3. Also, I will, before we get started with all this talk about plot points and other things, let me just tell you that I do have an entire series of videos here on YouTube called Plot Your Novel, and it comes with a free download that is an entire plotting workbook, and I know that you will love it and find it helpful if you enjoy this video. So I will also have that linked for you down below, because I talk about all of these steps in great detail. So hopefully it'll help you as you plan for your NaNoWriMo novel or for your novel at any old time in the year. Now let's talk briefly about why I like to use index cards. I actually will use multiple tools. I sometimes will use these larger size index cards. Sometimes I will use the smaller sort of 3x5 ones. I also love to use Post-it notes in various sizes. Lately, I have been really loving using these little page flags because all of these things are movable and pretty easily portable. One thing I particularly love though about the regular just 3x5 index cards is that it gives you a chance to be more detailed than you can be on a Post-it note. So you can get more information as long as you write pretty small onto the card, but it's also small enough that you can really stretch out and see a bird's eye view of your entire story. And because they're movable and flexible, you can set out your story grid and then you can move scenes around. So you can play with your story. You can really step through the whole plot as if you were watching a movie. Just follow the grid down, and I'll show you my process for this in just a few minutes. Then once your note cards are done, you can pack them all up, stick them on a little ring, like a binder ring like this, or put a rubber band around them, and then you can take them with you everywhere you go, even if that's just going from the couch to your bedroom upstairs. Now, since we're talking about the note cards themselves, I will also just step you through the fact that what I do with my note cards and what kind of cards I use will often be dependent on whether I'm writing a story with a single point of view character, where we're only in the head of that one character and we see everything through his or her eyes, or if I'm writing a multiple POV story where I have many people that we're following them through the story. So with a single POV story, I will usually just use white note cards. And remember how I said the 3-act structure is actually broken into 4 sections? When I first start out with my note cards, I will often start with what I call a header card. So it just says Act 1, and I will put a tab or just fold over a piece of washi tape on the side, usually close to the top, so that I know later when I put all my cards together that this is Act 1. Then I will do the same thing for Act 2. And again, I label it Act 2, Part 1. You could also say the first half of Act 2, and so on. So that later, when these are lined up, you can easily sort of tab through them with those little washi strips. Then what I will do is I will count out 10 white index cards for each section, so 40 total. And this is really just a starting point for me, where I'm assuming that I will have 10 or less scenes in each section of my story for a total of about 40 scenes in the entire book. Of course, this is greatly going to depend on how long your book is or what type of genre you're writing. But for me, I tend to write between 70 and 90,000 words per book. So 40 scenes is generally about right. And I aim to write the action, POV, setting, and conflict of each scene of the book on one of these note cards. So every scene in the book gets a note card. So I will start by putting these in stacks of 10 underneath the header card. And that's my first step. Just to briefly talk you through what I do when I have multiple POVs. So if I am working on my Shadow Demon saga, I have 4 points of view. So what I usually do is I get these packs of Oxford index cards that have the purple, blue, green, red, and yellow. Now I have used most of my purple note cards, but there are still a few. You can tell I don't really use the yellow ones. And so I will just pull out those 4 points of view because it's easy and they're already made and they're lined and they're nice. And actually these Oxford ones in the different colors come in both the large size and the smaller size. And it's pretty easy to find page flags that match because I am all about the color coding, or grabbing some markers that match each of those 4 colors. It gets a little bit more complicated when you're writing like 8 points of view. So when I do a larger book, like I'm working on the final book in my Eternal Sorrows trilogy, I just went to Michael's and got some medium weight cardstock in various colors, and I cut them down myself. That way I had color-coded index cards that matched a set of stickers that I bought off of Amazon. I will also link that below, along with a video where I talk about how I plot a multiple POV book, so you can see this in more detail. On the darker index cards, I will use white pens, and on the just regular ones, I will use black pens. But that gives me a chance to have my own color coding system if I would like, without spending a ton of money on like custom cards or anything. You just make your own cards through cardstock. You can usually get it pretty cheap at places like Walmart or Michael's here in the States. Now, the 40 scenes or 10 note cards per part, like section of the book, doesn't always work out when it comes to the multiple POV stories for me. So what I tend to do is I will just set aside 4 or 5 note cards for each color per section. So that'll actually end up with a lot more note cards than I probably need, but that at least gives me a place to start from. So that's the note cards. What I will typically do next is I will create a story grid. Now for this section, I need a long or big table like my dining room table, or I will get down on the floor and start putting those cards out on the floor. For most of the rest of this, I'm just going to talk about the single POV because it can get really complicated and this video is already going to be long enough. So what I'll do is I'll take those 10 white note cards. I will put my header card that says Act 1 at the top of my story columns, and then I will just put those 10 cards in order down the row. What I will do next, once those 4 columns are set out, is I will start, just like I talked about in the video the week before last, is I will start working through my story puzzle. So what I mentioned was when you do a puzzle, so often you will find just the outer edge pieces that have the flat edge, and then you will locate those 4 main corner pieces so that you can orient your puzzle. This is what I do when I am plotting my novel, and this is just my process and definitely not the only way to do it. It's just the way I prefer to do it. I will start and figure out each of the main turning points at the end of each act. This includes the hook at the very beginning of the story, the end of Act 1, which is often called the first doorway of no return, the midpoint, which is the end of Act 2, Part 1. Then I will figure out the second doorway of no return, which is the climax of Act 2. And then I will figure out the black moment, or what's the climactic moment, and what is the resolution of the story. And once I have those 5 pieces in place, I will tend to have my corner of my entire book. So where those go, obviously, is the first note card is that hook. Then the other ones are sort of the bottom of each column. Now let's talk briefly about what goes on each of these note cards. So first, I will write the name of the character if I have a multi-POV book. If I'm writing from a single point of view, then I don't need the name of the character. But if there's more than one main character in the story that has a point of view, I will write the name of the character first. The next thing I will add to my note card is what plot point is this? So if it's the hook or the disturbance, I will write that on the card. If it doesn't correspond to a specific turning point or plot point, then I will just leave this part blank for now because it might get moved around or shuffled around later. So the next thing I will write on the card is the setting. So this is just basically, where is your character in this scene? Where is it happening? If it's the first time my character or myself or the reader is seeing this place, then I will leave as many notes as I can. There's ivy wrapping up the sides. It's a white house with big columns. It's set in the woods, and I'll put a lot of details. Then next time we see this place occur in the setting, I don't have to leave as many notes. But the first time we see a place, I do like to put those notes on the note card. I also, and this is the main part, like the meat of the note card, is the main action of this scene. So is this a action scene? Is this a conversation? Is this a discovery or an unveiling of a mystery? What is happening in the scene? What is the main action? What's the main point of it? Now, at this stage of planning, in the early stages, I may not know very much about what happens. It may just be something like Harper discovers the necklace, and that may be all that I know so far. So for me, the creation of the note cards is really an iterative process. I will start with something very simple, and then as I fill things in, I will go in and continue to add to the cards. So I will keep space on the front of that card for any notes that I want to add about the main action. On the back of the card, I will put a little bit of information about the conflict or why this scene matters to the story. How is it making a difference in the story or affecting the story world? So first I will put the outer conflict or connection. So how does this scene or what is discovered or what happens in this scene affect the rest of the story world? And then I'll make a note about the inner world of my character. How does what this character is going through in the scene affect her inner journey, her inner conflict, her character arc, basically? So I have an outer conflict and an inner conflict. And usually, like I said, I will mark that on the back. And again, sometimes because I'm not sure if this scene is actually going to take place in Act 1 or Act 2, I won't know that yet. So I will add that as needed. sometimes a scene doesn't need to have that much detail. You will figure it out and trust yourself that when you're writing it, it will come together. So even as I'm writing, sometimes I will make that note and say, oh gosh, I didn't know how this would affect her character arc, but now that I've written it, I see what an impact it has on her, and I will make notes of that on my index card so that when I go back to edit the novel, I remember to tie that piece of her character arc and that realization or change or growth into the rest of the story threads. So now that you've gotten a closer look at what goes on the note cards, and you've seen me fill out the ones for the very beginning and then all the major turning points, you can see that there are so many just white blank note cards left over. So here's what I do next. Next, I will fill out as many of these blank note cards as I can based on two things. One, the story structure that I have in my Plot Your Novel workbook. This Plot Your Novel workbook is not based on any one reference book in particular. It's really kind of my own process that I have. It is kind of the culmination of a decade of writing and learning to write. So there are many books that I pull from, lots of knowledge and just personal stuff, personal writing experience that I pull from. But if you go into and you download that Plot Your Novel workbook, you will get an entire list of the books that I use and that have taught me the most. And I am continuing to learn from great authors who share their knowledge. So go pick up those books for sure. What I have created for myself is a master note card reference booklet, I guess you could say. And what I've done is I just reuse this over and over, but I have taken all of the plot points from my Plot Your Novel workbook, and I have just written a few little phrases or sentences about what is happening or why that particular plot point is important. And they're all in order. And of course, because it's me, they're color coded as well. So I have Act 1 is blue, Act 2, Part 1 is green, and then Part 2 is yellow, and then Act 3 is red. And for every single one of those points that I have in your Plot Your Novel workbook, I have just a little bit of a reference here as to what I need to keep in mind when I'm looking at that plot point. So for example, if I turn to the midpoint, which is the climax of the first half of Act 2, it says, everything changes all over again. A centerpiece to hang the story on, caps the reactions in the first half and sets up the actions that will lead into Act 3, changes the paradigm of the story and requires a definitive and story-altering response from your character, no longer just a reaction, begins to take charge and act out against the antagonist. So what this is, these are not my words. These are me going back into my favorite reference books that I talk about in that Plot Your Novel workbook and pulling out what I feel were the gems. So these are kind of like my crib notes from those other books, which is why I also have not given you these to download, because then that would be copyright infringement. But if you want to make your own note cards, go grab some of those books. Some of my favorite ones are Story Structure by James Scott Bell, The Screenwriting Tricks for Authors that I mentioned from Alexandra Sokoloff, and my ultimate favorite, which is called Structuring Your Novel by K.M. Weiland. She is so brilliant, and I reference her stuff all the time. But it's really a combination of these that have given me the overview of how to plot my story. So I have taken my favorite like highlighted sections from those books and put them here because it jars my memory as I'm creating my note cards for the story. So what I have done to organize this is basically, like I said, color coded, but then I have just taken a single hole punch and punched the corners and then used a single binder clip that opens and closes from Amazon, which I will link some of these down below if you want to grab some from yourself. You can get them in silver or in color, and that way I can carry it with me. And when I am working through all of these blank note cards and it feels super overwhelming, I will start from the beginning and I will say, okay, what's the hook? If I don't have it yet, I'll start brainstorming it. And if I can't figure it out, I'll move to the next one. Okay, so what is the argument against transformation for this character? Okay, so this frames the character arc. What lesson are they going to learn? They're claiming the opposite or denying the change that's to occur. Now, I know that at this stage in my process, I have already been through my character sheets and figured out the beginning, middle, and end of my character's arc. So the argument against transformation is not that difficult for me to figure out usually at this stage of the game. So I just have to figure out what's happening in the scene, when they come to this argument against transformation, because there's usually something that frames that scene. There's some kind of action happening there. So I'll just start brainstorming. The second thing that I do, besides going through each of the plot points and trying to write the things I know, because sometimes I'll know and sometimes I'll skip it and go to the next one or the next one and the next one. I fill out as many as I can. The second way that I fill out the blank cards is really just to close my eyes and think through my story. Imagine what I know so far as if it were a movie and think, okay, how do I get my character from the beginning all the way down to this major turning point at the end of Act 1? And I'll just step through it. What types of things need to happen to her? So I will say, okay, in order for her to progress through, she's got to meet the hero of the story, and that has to happen pretty early. So even if I don't know all of the details between or about how they meet, I'm going to go ahead and fill out a note card according to that information that has them meeting for the first time. Then I'll think through the story again and go, okay, so now that they've met, what has to happen next? And it just becomes a logical stepping through the life of this character or these characters. You say, okay, now she's at school. Do I want to show her first day at school or not? Do I need to show her getting home from school? Is there any other conflict that needs to happen? How can I make this interesting? And know that the whole way through, I'm trying to get her to this Act 1 climax where her best friend is kidnapped. So if she's new to the school, she has to meet the girl, she has to become best friends with her. So how is that going to happen? What types of things can I put them through in this first act that is going to solidify their relationship enough for the reader to care that one girl is kidnapped? So it becomes a process of trying to fill in the blanks. And after I've stepped through the entire novel that way, if there's any points that I'm just not sure where something connects, I will skip to the next thing. And I will just take it one step at a time. And sometimes I'll be in Act 1, I get stuck, and I will go to the end of the book and I'll say, okay, well, I know I want them to end up here where they're going to be fighting this demon. So what happens that gets them to that point? Is somebody kidnapped? How do they end up in this situation? Or I'll say, okay, I know that she's going to defeat this demon with a mirror. So I need to work in a scene earlier in the book where she learns about this type of mirror magic. So I will write a note card and say, you know, Lenny learns mirror magic and understands the spell that will trap the demon in the mirror. And so I will mark that scene. I may not know where that belongs because it's some kind of magic and Lenny isn't doing magic in Act 1. Maybe I will know that it's going to belong somewhere in the middle of Act 2, but not sure where. So for now, without putting any pressure on it, I will just plop the note card down somewhere in the middle of Act 2. And once I've gone through and stepped through and filled out as many of the note cards as I can, I will then basically start at the beginning and I will play through the whole story in my mind like a movie. Okay, I can see Lenny waking up, talking to her uncle, going to school. She meets the hero. This is what happens. And I'm always thinking in terms of scenes and sequels. There's action and there's reaction from your character. So she learns something and then she reacts or uses it in some way and makes a new plan. Then there's new action. Then there's a big twist. And I'm always thinking about that level of pacing. So if you're not sure what pacing is or how to plan for pacing in your novel, I do have a great video about that as well that I will link for you down below. But I will step through the whole story like a movie, and that helps me see any little plot holes or points. And sometimes I'll think, I don't know how to get from A to B, but I know that I need some kind of scene where she discovers XYZ. And so I will just write on the note card, Lenny discovers this magic. How? Question mark, question mark. And it's okay to do that. You don't have to have all the answers because sometimes the magic of writing will just be that it will magically come to you as you're writing and that you need to get into the story to start figuring it out. Like I said, sometimes I won't know how it plays into the character arc until I'm actually writing. Sometimes I'll just get all the note cards done for Act 1 and I know that I'm ready to start writing without figuring out the rest of it. So like I said, I don't follow every one of these steps for every single book because I really have learned that it's all about trusting my own intuition as the storyteller. You as the author, you know better. You just need to get the tools and the knowledge to put a story together right, and then trust yourself to know what's going to happen in the writing and what you need to know ahead of time. Some people really just need a bare bones sort of outline idea, and some people need 1,000 note cards that are color coded. But everybody has a process, and you have to learn to trust and develop your own. When I feel satisfied that I have filled in as many cards as possible, then I will start, like I said, when I'm going through that step by step in my head, picturing my characters stepping through this story, that's when I'll start mixing things up. Oh, you know what? It makes more sense for her to discover this before she goes to the party because she's going to use that knowledge. Okay, let me move this note card to the top. And I will just start moving them around. This is particularly helpful when I am writing a multiple POV novel, because I may know that this happens, but I won't know if it feels right in that order or that sequence until I'm sort of stepping through it, or maybe even until I'm writing, and that's fine too. But I will get the note cards as detailed as I can, and then I will start putting them in order. So like I mentioned before, I do like to have a header card for each of the acts that I will just put a little piece of washi tape on, so that when I'm thumbing through later, I can easily just hit Act 3 or the second half of Act 2, and it just makes it easier in terms of organization. Now, in terms of how I store these, I sometimes will just wrap a big rubber band around them and call it a day, throw it in my bag and keep them together that way. If I have time, then I will often just punch them and put them on a binder ring. You can also use one of those big like alligator clips if you have one big enough to hold a really big stack of note cards. But there are lots of ways that you can do it. There are even like boxes, like recipe boxes that you can use to store your note cards in, where you can have tabs, and that might really work for you. I used to have a box like this. I even had it decorated with some pretty washi tape, but I found that carrying that box around was a little bit cumbersome, so it works better for me to have them just stacked like this with a clip or a rubber band around them. And that is basically my index card system. I love to do this, and I love to step through it because it gives this such a bird's eye view. It gives you this way that you can step through the story and actually visualize it. There are other ways that you can do this besides just using index cards. One way, and I won't get too close with this because this has spoilers on it, is to take the story grid that I have in the back of my Plot Your Novel, or just take a piece of paper and separate it into 4 sections, and then use these tiny little page flags. So here I have a multiple POV novel, but you could use the page flags in color code to indicate things like action versus reaction, or new information versus, meeting a new character, or whatever you wanted to do. You could come up with your own color code. But basically, you could use these page flags to mark all the same things that you would as if each one of these is an index card. And because they're Post-it notes, you can move these around as well. The reason that I don't always use these when I'm doing my big novel, like first original plot, is that you can't really put as much information on a tiny little page flag. Like some of these say things like, they're on the road, strange, had a dream. Like that doesn't really tell you so much. I even have a big board out here that I've shown in one of my previous videos, and I will go over again before the end of the year. I use these sort of somewhat larger Post-its. These are kind of the these aren't the 3x3. These are more like 2x2, I think. And even with this, you can't write as much information as you can on a whole note card. So it just depends how much space you need. Another thing you could do is you could get these really larger ones. I think these are 5x8 or something like that. And you could write those same plot points with either the page flags that you move around down the card, or you could just leave a note in pencil that you could erase on the larger note cards. I also have a plotting notes booklet that is made from these larger cards that I could show you, that's very portable, and again gives you a ton of information. So if you want to see that, I will also have that video linked down below. So there's lots of binge-worthy content if you are getting ready for Preptober. So I hope you'll check those out. But this is my index card process. And as I am writing my novel, I will just start at the beginning of the stack that I have all stacked up, and I will say, okay, Act 1 starts here, here's the disturbance, and I will keep my stack with me, and I will just write that scene. Often when I'm finished with the scene, I will go back and mark on the card anything new I learned or anything new that developed throughout the writing of this, like something regarding the inner conflict of the character or information that came about in the writing or a new character that popped up, or, you know, sometimes your characters don't want to do what you told them to do on this note card. So you're going to have changes and things are going to, you know, maybe need to change. So I might have to rewrite the note card to put it in place because I'm going to use these again when I'm editing. So I will make notes on the cards as I go. Another thing that I will note on my card after I'm finished writing is how many words that scene ended up being. So I will write, you know, 1,258 words. When I'm feeling really sassy, I will also write how long it took me to write that scene in rough draft so that I can use that in my estimates for how long it will take me next time to write a similar scene. If I'm writing and I get to a note card and think, logically, that is not going to happen next because she actually has to have this conversation with her father before she can go to the party, then I will just pull out one of those blank note cards, write the new scene, and continue writing and put it back in order. And some of that information will just naturally come out as you're writing. So this is really a process of planning as much as you need to plan to get started and to really start moving forward, but not over planning to where you just never write your story because you're so busy trying to get it perfect. I know that filling out all these details and all the plot points can sometimes feel really overwhelming, but just remember as you're writing, especially with NaNoWriMo, that no one's expecting the story to be perfect. You're going to rewrite it later. And a lot of the surprises and the magic of it will come when you're sitting down to actually write. So just step into the process, try out the note cards, get as much of it down as you can, but don't stress about this is exactly what has to go on the card. Get as much down as you can, even if it's just a single line about what's happening in the action, and then keep refining your process. For me, this is the process that has evolved over the course of 26 novels and really 14 years of writing seriously. So it's not like I just started doing this right with book one. And actually, if you go and read my very first book, Beautiful Demons, and then you go and read my most recent book, The Witch is Key, you will see just how much better I have gotten, not only in my writing, but also in the tightness of my story structure and the quality of the pacing in my stories. So no one's expecting you to be perfect. It's a process not only of writing, but of learning to be a writer. So trust yourself, do the best you can, and most importantly, have fun doing it. All right, you guys, thank you so much for hanging out with this pretty long, but hopefully informative and inspirational video. I hope that you will join our Hearties community here. Join my newsletter list to get all those freebies. Comment down below and subscribe and like this video. Share it with your friends who are also planning for Nano. And I will see you guys on Sunday with a walkthrough of how to use all the word count trackers in my Preptober planner. And then next week, we will have one final video on what to do if you get stuck. In addition, I will be doing daily vlogs during the month of November. I am calling it the NaNoWriMo Diaries, and I hope that you will join me here every day to not only get inspiration and tips, but also to see the behind the scenes of writing a novel in 30 days, and we can all cheer each other on in the comments. So I will see you in those upcoming videos. Bye.